Welcome, everyone. I'm Lauren Hawkins. Thanks for tuning in with us to Spirituality Adventures. We are so glad you're here, and we're very excited about the content we get to share with you through our blogs and podcasts. Spirituality Adventures is made possible by your support. One way you can support us is by liking, following, subscribing, or sharing any of these podcasts or blogs that you like. Another way you can support us is by going to our website, www.spiritualityadventures.com. There you can click the support tab and you can sign up for a monthly subscription or a one-time gift. We appreciate all your support. Now here's Fred.
Today I am blessed, and we are blessed to have Harmony Eccles join us. And Harmony is somebody that I met, I can't even remember when, back maybe 20 years ago or something.
Yeah.
Would it be that long ago?
Probably around 2006.
Okay.
2007, maybe.
15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I've always loved her and her husband, Jeremy, their approach to life. And they both seem to me to be very creative spirits. And I'm doing this topic right now, starting this out on creativity and spirituality. So Harmony came out with a series of paintings called Lament and put it into a book as well. And so I saw a copy of that on her Instagram, and I thought, oh man, I'd love to interview her on this because her pieces just really spoke to me. But before we get into her work on Lament, I wanted her to give just a little bit of background of her and Jeremy, and kind of give us the 5-minute version of where you're from and kind of your journey and where you're at right now. It's an interesting journey that you've been on.
It is. Jeremy and I both grew up in Iowa, and then we're both the oldest of our families, both in a family of 5. And both grew up with a good foundation in spiritual exploration, let's say. His was more conservative than mine was. Mine was Catholic, and his was more on the Baptist side. And anyway, I mention that because the artwork that I've done is very spiritual for me. And I've kind of had a long progression of what that looks like in my life. And so we are living in Berlin now, but we met years ago, 25 years ago at Iowa State University.
That's not Berlin, Missouri, right?
No, it's Berlin, Germany.
I'm just kidding. Missouri has every city in the world somewhere in it, anyway. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I've been living over here for almost 2 years. And before that, we had stayed in the Midwest. We lived in Germany for 5 years, into the early 2000s, and moved back to the Midwest and then to Kansas City, and had some really great years of spiritual formation, I would say. And also I had some wonderful awakenings to what painting could be and creativity could be in my life. And that happened around 2009, probably, when I was taking a class on inner healing. And so everything kind of shifted after that time from a very standard religious experience to a spirituality that was profoundly different than what I had been taught, what I had been told. It was just very out of the box. And I suppose Jeremy and I were always sort of out of the box thinkers, or maybe slightly rebellious, however you want to put it. Always asking questions, very logical, but creative as well. So there was this tension of seeing how creativity and spirituality went together, but also this intellect side that wanted to combine everything into a nice bubble.
Yeah.
And we've seen where that bubble works and where it doesn't now that we're in our upper 40s. But
yeah, I'm curious, when you first moved to Germany, that first 5-year stint,
right.
Were any of your kids born in Germany?
Both my girls were.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And then one born in America, huh?
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And what was your purpose for going there the first time?
You know, Jeremy had always had a fascination with Germany, and I didn't really care either way what we did. After college, I was sort of open to exploring the world and thought, well, if he wants to go there, I'm game, because we're young and this is a good time to try new things and see more of the world than I had before. My family wasn't really much into traveling, so I hadn't thought about moving outside of Iowa, quite honestly. So this idea of moving overseas was shocking, but also really exciting.
Okay.
To think about something that.
So it was an adventure.
Unique. It was
an
spiritual
adventure.
It was, absolutely.
All right. Cool. I know when we met and when I found out about the Germany, so I had a few German connections, and I think I probably introduced you to a couple of my German friends. One would have been Klaus Jambor, and he said to say hi, by the way. I chatted with him on the phone just a few days ago. And then I think I helped you meet Martin Buhlman, did I not?
Yes.
Did I connect you guys?
Yes,
have you seen him since you've moved over to Berlin, or any?
Actually have not.
Okay.
Because of COVID. And
yeah.
He was still kind of the head of Vineyard Berlin here until we moved here. And then it has changed leadership to someone that he kind of mentored.
Okay.
And so we stay in touch with the leadership of Vineyard Berlin. And Jeremy actually stayed with the creative director for 9 months until I moved here with the kids.
Yeah, cool.
So,
yeah, I was over in Bern, Switzerland, and came to know Martin. Martin planted a vineyard in Bern, Switzerland, and we had come to know each other through the years. Probably met in the 90s or something like that. And and then his son, I think, is now the pastor of the Bern, Switzerland. I think
so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then he was heading up the Berlin. So anyway, it's a church movement. For those of you who don't know Vineyard, it's just a movement of churches around the world, actually, that I've been a part of for many, many years. Well, let's jump into your artwork. So you've titled the book, and I guess this series of paintings, Creative Lament. Is that right?
That's right. Creative
Lament. I love that title. And basically, lament is it's about grief and loss. It's how you process grief and loss and sorrow and stuff like that. And for our audience who might not know this, there's 150 Psalms in the Hebrew Bible. And about a third of the Psalms are what we would categorize as Psalms of lament, either individual Psalms of lament. We could even call them songs of lament. You know, a lot of they're poetic verse, and many of them were probably sung. And then some of them were for community lament as well. So there's some that were individuals and some that were for community. And so it just captured my attention, and you started kind of posting some of your paintings on Instagram, and so I just got very intrigued. And then when I saw that you'd come out with a book, I wanted to get it, and you graciously sent me a PDF so that I could get ready for this interview. But one of the things that you start out with is just like the workspace itself. And
Yeah.
I was thinking about creativity and environment and workspace, and then how that workspace environment and creativity was a part of the way you started spilling out your emotional construct.
Yeah. Yes.
I thought that was fascinating. How do you find that your physical environment is important to the creative process, as well as was it important for this process of grieving?
Yes, absolutely. I'd like to say that it's not important, but it is. I just can't get away from that. Jeremy found this apartment that we're in, and it has what they call a winter garden, which is like a room that has 3 walls of windows, and it has become my studio space, and it's so amazing. I feel so it's very unlikely to find a space in Berlin that's big enough for a family and affordable, let alone to have a room like this that has so much natural light. So for me, I, of course, like my space really organized, which might be a little bit different than some artists do, but I'm a designer by profession, and my bachelor's degree is in graphic design. So I have this sort of organized design approach to things as well. So having 3 walls of natural light coming in was, for this series of paintings, was really, I think, critical for me, because I felt like I was in such a dark place already that I don't think I could have handled also being in a dark space physically and having the motivation or that little bit of the push of nature, I would say, is right outside my windows. There's a lot of green and trees and tons of birds singing. And it's almost like I needed that surrounding of comforting sound and scenery to have a resting place, to let my guard down, to really be able to paint things that felt heavy and felt dark, because it's not typical of the paintings that I do. So it was kind of initially scary anyway to dive into a series of work that I knew wouldn't be something I'd want to hang on my wall necessarily. I do have a couple of them on my wall, but like one of them I just keep in the basement because it's so dark that I don't want to walk by that every day. It really it does reflect how I was feeling, and it's good to be reminded of that. But anyway, so this space that I was in was really great, really important.
That's cool. What about let's say when you poured out this ink bottle and all this initial effort, like you're trying to go I have the energy to do this. Well, I've got to do it, kind of a thing. And I need to deal with this. Was this at give us a time frame for that. Was that at the beginning of the pandemic? Was it early 2020, or was it earlier than that you started this process?
This was the fall of 2020. So
okay,
well into the pandemic.
Okay.
And what had led up to this point was going back to before we moved to Berlin. Jeremy had lost his job. I was working, and it took him 7 months maybe to find a job, which ended up being here in Berlin. And then he moved ahead of me and the kids so that they could finish school. I was working full time, raising 3 teenagers. That was something special. And trying to sell a house and wrap up life and get ready to move internationally, which also meant unloading probably a quarter to a third of our belongings over time, over a few months' time. And that alone just had amassed an amount of stress that I knew I was taking on. I knew that it was unhealthy. And I just told myself, well, there isn't really an option. Like, this is what I have to do. And I can do it because I know there's an end and that then I can work through it. However, then you move overseas and try and adjust to life over here. And then the pandemic started, which meant that we couldn't take that next step in adjusting by being present in the city and by getting together with people and even learning the language by interacting. And so that I knew it was going to be hard to be here, but it was much harder than I had anticipated. And it took longer to just initially adjust. I thought last time we moved to Germany, it took about 6 months for me to feel like, okay, this is home. And I thought, I'm going to give myself a year, generously give myself a year to adjust. And right at the time that year came, my 2 daughters decided to move back to the US. And that was my undoing. It was the best decision for them, in my opinion, and in theirs. But it just was like, I had not anticipated it. And I wasn't ready to lose them. And especially not at the same time during a pandemic and not knowing when I'd see them again. So that happened in the fall. And after I kind of moved them back to the US, and then I came back here and I sat down with Jeremy and I was like, I am not okay. I mean, yes, there are things in the past that have sort of accumulated to this point, but now I really feel completely overwhelmed and I don't have the ability to like physically cope, or I'm not sure what to do. But kind of my big indicator of that something was really wrong is that one of my closest, most precious friends sat me down and expressed her disappointment in how I had not like been connecting with her very well. And I just thought in that moment, oh my gosh, I am not being honest with myself about what's going on and my need to process loss. And it's affecting me so much that my like best friend is having to tell me that they're disappointed in me being disconnected. And I didn't even know that was happening. And I need to really pay attention to what's going on. I can't keep going.
Wow. Was this a friend of yours in Berlin or one here in America?
A friend of mine that lives in Iowa.
Okay.
Yeah. And has lived overseas and lived in Kansas City. So we have sort of a understanding of what that can be like anyway. So she was very understanding anyway.
Right.
So for her to get to this point with me is very unusual. It's like, come on.
Okay. So in the book, that gives us a good intro to this. One of the little phrases in your book, you had written some thoughts next to your paintings. And one of the little phrases that stuck with me is sitting with uncomfortable emotions. Sitting with uncomfortable emotions. That captured me because I would say that's something I've never done very well. Sit with uncomfortable emotions.
Doesn't feel good.
Has that been a part of the way have you been good at processing uncomfortable emotions throughout most of your life? Or is it like you put them aside, they build up, and then all of a sudden once they're about ready to explode, you finally realize, oh, I need to sit with this a little while. What?
Yeah.
I mean, have you realized the importance of sitting with uncomfortable emotions most of your life?
I would say since about 2009, when I was had really started this painting in a particular way. It was a way for me to process all kinds of emotions, particularly ones that were uneasy and hard to understand, in order to get to a place of better understanding or a place of peace or joy. And so I'd say probably for 15 years, maybe a little less than that, it's been a regular practice of mine to work through anything that I felt was negative emotion. But sometimes, it just all piles up. And even though I would say, yeah, I think I'm pretty good at this, or it is something I intend to do, that I just got to a point where I was like, I can't effectively do what I've always done to process the emotions. And I think I realized that there was something different happening. I read Burnout. Maybe you've read that too, but about unlocking stress, the stress cycle. And as I was reading that, I thought, wow, I have been good at addressing the stressors as I meet them, but the overall accumulation of stress, like in my body, I have not dealt with. And I'm going to have to do something about that. And one of their suggestions in the book is to use creativity as a way to kind of get it out.
That's awesome. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. In one of my blogs, and I can't remember which one actually, but because I had grown up, and I'm not blaming this on anybody, it's just what I soaked in through my, growing up years in church and all that kind of stuff, is that negative emotions were almost attached to my quote sinful nature, my old nature. So like any kind of negative emotion for me was kind of associated with being sinful. And so I always tried to suppress, conquer, avoid, ignore, but probably just, and a lot of therapists use the picture of the beach ball and trying to hold it under the water forever, and it just doesn't work, especially if it's a big beach ball.
Right.
And so once my beach ball popped out from underneath the surface, it was a mess, right? And then I had to because when the Apostle Paul talked about the sinful nature, like Galatians 5 and Romans 7 and stuff, a lot of the things he mentions that are connected to the sinful nature are actions, not emotions, behaviors versus emotions. He doesn't really deal a lot with emotions when he talks about that stuff. And so I had to find my home in the Psalms of the Lament and the Psalms of Lament. And they are full of every human emotion, every negative human emotion. They're spilled out in the pages. There are times when, like Psalm 22, I'll get back to your painting here in a minute, I want to just read the first two verses of Psalm 22. This would just be one example of a Psalm of Lament. And it's one that if you grew up in church, you've heard it before.
Yeah.
My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far away when I cry for help? Mm-hmm. Every day I call to you, my God, but you do not answer. Every night you hear my voice, but I find no relief. The first two verses. Now I could read that whole psalm, and then I could read you sections of my journal, which are very raw, which I won't do, but and of course that verse was made famous because Jesus quoted that first line while he was on the cross, right? It's a Psalm of Lament. And so I've had to really re-examine my whole relationship to negative emotion and uncomfortable emotions. That's why I wanted to start with that little phrase, sitting with uncomfortable emotions. And even like mindful meditation is something I've been doing a lot of, and sitting with those negative emotions, you know. And I love the physicality of your dealing with those negative emotions in such a tangible, physical, creative way. I loved that. It made me want to be an artist, you know.
Yeah. Well, you are an artist with words.
That's right. I'm trying. So anyway, but so after you the first painting in your book that is posted there is it's the one that's full of kind of like these blue, dark blue kind of ocean type colors. And you didn't really title the painting, but in the little words that you wrote out next to it, you said it wasn't intentional, but when you finally looked at it, it looked like a sinking ship.
Right.
So you were tearing pieces of canvas, so you evidently started with a huge chunk of canvas, right? I
had more or less scraps, and I didn't have the energy to go buy new supplies. And I thought, well, I need to start, and I can't let buying supplies and not buying supplies keep me from starting the process. So I'll just use some things I have. And so I was tearing sort of smaller pieces that I had apart and just seeing what happened. And then after that initial experimentation, then I bought some big pieces of canvas to really carry this momentum of grieving and sitting, like you said, sitting with the negative emotions is really hard. It's so counterintuitive for me also. I don't want to be uncomfortable, let alone sit uncomfortably for any length of time. And so I think that was part of my desperation to really get things out on the canvas. I realized I can't just sit here forever with this, or it will be consuming, and I don't want to keep feeling like this for a long time.
So for those who are listening to the podcast and you're not viewing it, you if you want to, you can check it out on my website or YouTube. We will show some of the pictures that we're talking about right now. So this first one is Sinking Ship. And that's actually what I thought of when I saw it without reading anything about it. And I just find that fascinating that happened accidentally. Yeah.
Yep. I couldn't draw a ship if I tried. So
That's
it was sort of remarkable that it abstractly looked like that when I stood back from it. And I just thought, oh gosh, this is me right now. This is what I feel like is happening. I
really like that piece. It's so good. So good. So then you say that you had all these different pieces that you've torn. You've got paint on them. There's just these torn fragments all around you. And that sitting in that mess for a while kind of bugged you a little bit.
Yeah, it did.
So what did you do to try to bring some order to that chaos?
Right. So looking at the spread of torn up canvas everywhere, and I went to IKEA and I bought frames, and I put these scraps, these rough drafts, if you will, into frames and put them on my wall in a nice, wonderful arrangement that made me feel okay about life. And I just had to I don't know, somehow bring it back in to this place where it's comfortable for a moment, to take a break from seeing the reality of how I was feeling, seeing this raw canvas and the torn edges and the strings falling off and everything feeling very disconnected. And I thought, if I just pause and hang these on the wall in a way that feels organized and contained, I can take a deep breath before I move on to this next part of painting, which I knew would be more devastating for me. It would be a lot harder.
Okay. I'm going to inject an idea here. Tell me if you think it fits. Yeah. So in my therapy work over the last couple of years, and then and I've read time, I'm a big reader, so I read all the time. And I've read all about emotions from all different kinds of perspectives. And, as kids, we're not in America, we're not taught how to identify emotions, label emotions, process emotions. We're pretty much emotionally illiterate. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's actually people that are Mark Brackett and some other people like this that are actually advocating for emotional education starting in elementary schools with American kids now, and getting a little bit of traction because of people like Brene Brown and how she's brought so much awareness to some of these issues in such a big way. And so, but they will tell you that just actually, you have hundreds of emotions, but actually naming them, labeling them, like this is this emotion, naming it, identifying it, and acknowledging it is huge. It's like a critical part of the healing process. And when I saw what you did with these fragments and framing them, it made me think of that a little bit, like a physical way of doing that to some degree. Does that fit a little bit?
Yeah, it does. I think for a while I could just see that on the wall, and I knew that I did know or sense that each piece was kind of representative of something I needed to work through. It was like I had hung this group of losses on my wall, and I needed them to be up there to remind me, like, you're not done with this process. You walk by these every day. You need to look at them and not be afraid to look at them right in the face and know that it's okay. And so to just make them a little prettier and easier to look at was a way to get myself to say, okay, it's all right. This feels like a really huge bunch of ugly stuff I have to work through, but I have to. I have to do it.
So that's so good. And it's right at the spot that you talk about the losses. So, I mean, grief is always, usually grief, usually depression, usually anger. Some of these are usually tied to losses, right? And you listed a bunch, like you listed job, community, identity, familiarity, communication, friendship, control, mobility, or predictability, security, stability, dreams, trust. Were you naming all your own, or were you just trying to put a whole bunch of them out there?
Those were all my own.
Wow. It's a lot of them. But the last one caught my attention that you mentioned, and that was spiritual certainty.
Yeah.
But the loss of spiritual certainty.
Yeah.
Tell me what you meant by that.
That one was something that had been going on for a while. So it's last in that list because it wasn't like the most current of losses that I felt. That one's, it's a little hard to explain, but I'm going to do my best. So I have just been on an interesting path, I guess, of spiritual awareness and what that can look like, and a lot of ideas that I had that are more conservative that felt damaging, and not only to me, but to other people. And as I've, probably about 5 years ago, started really wrestling with that and some ideas that are commonly held by the church, the Christian church. And I worked at a church at the time. So it was sort of interesting to be having these ideas that were negative. And I wouldn't even say for me that they were negative. It was that I was realizing that something had to change in me, but also in the church generally. And so that took kind of stepping outside of what I have known and being willing to have things be different. And part of what happened there was that my daughter, Allegra, was part of a theater in high school. And these kids were incredible and so unique and very opposed to Christianity for very good reasons. And I just saw how beautiful they were and how hurt they were. Well, it's gonna make me cry. And I thought, how can this be happening? How can we continue moving in the direction we are and rejecting so many people? And I saw how she interacted with them and how that was truly more church than a lot of the things I was experiencing, because they were there for each other. They were supportive. They were together for a greater purpose. They were being creative. They were being themselves. They were accepting each other. They were helping each other through the worst of problems, and just coming out of a culture of oppression and rejection, a lot of them. And our house kind of became their safe place. And we always had parties, and I just thought these are the people that I would choose to be around. They're there's so much that I have to learn from them. And I don't want to feel like I'm closing myself off to the true beauty that's in these individuals that have been rejected.
Yeah.
So that kind of started me really thinking about what church was and what love really can be. And so I all my church experiences honestly have been really pretty great. I have to say, I've learned a tremendous amount that is irreplaceable. And I've had to also sift through a lot of things that should be replaced. And then moving over here and losing all of that community, I realized I was really cynical. And it took me purposefully working through cynicism for probably 9 months. I mean, I was working at it. And I thought this will be a quick process because I'm being so intentional. And it just took so long. And I was having a conversation with my stepdad, actually, who's an atheist. And I realized that my tone was so negative about Christianity, and I just didn't feel like that was right anymore. This has to stop. It doesn't have to look how some people say it needs to look, but I'm doing myself and other people a disservice to also be overly negative about it and be cynical about it. And that's a weed that I have to pull out before anything else can really grow in my life as far as spiritual community. So
excellent.
That was a really long answer.
No, thanks for sharing that though.
Yeah.
So interesting. So I've been through my blogs and videos, I think mostly blogs probably. I've been very honest about my 2019 and literally written, I went through such a meltdown. I felt like an atheist. I felt like my faith was shattered. I felt like it was gone, like I'd lost it. And it was dark, very, very dark. And there was no quick fix. It was way too deep for that.
Yeah.
And then, I started connecting with the recovery community in Kansas City, sitting in rooms with alcoholics and addicts of every economic category, every faith and non-faith that you could imagine, every kind of lifestyle that you could imagine. And then all sitting there with all of us broken people, like just being honest about our brokenness.
Yeah.
And there was a tangible move of whatever you would want to call spirit, as real and tangible as anything I'd ever felt. Just honesty and brokenness. And there's something like magical about the bonding that can go on. And so when you described what you saw happening with your daughter's group, it reminded me of kind of what I was, in a different way, but in a similar way, what I was feeling. So like when I wrote a blog, Spirituality Adventures, and I just tried to define, because I listened to these rooms, and most all these people would be very anti-religious, extremely, even anti-Christianity, anti-this, but very spiritual. And so then I'm like, so what, so I tried to just listen long enough to see, well, what do they really mean by spiritual, in this not religious, but spiritual thing.
Right.
And then, so I finally defined, based on just what I listened to people, what I felt like people were meaning by spirituality. And I really just boiled it down to connection, or you could say belonging, connection or belonging with yourself, with others. So like what your daughter was experiencing with others,
Right.
and with something bigger than you, greater than you, that's loving and caring. However you define that, in the 12-step world, it's higher power, whatever. But that, for people, that doesn't necessarily mean God. It can mean, the community they're in, or something like that, or nature, some aspect of nature, or something like that. And so, but that's kind of what I boiled it down to. And then I was reading Brene Brown's book on belonging, and her definition was really similar. So just, if you were, I'm curious, have you thought about have you tried to define that thing that you're calling, that you went through, that, because you called it a loss of spiritual certainty, and yet you discovered spirituality in the midst of that loss of spiritual certainty. You see what I'm saying?
I think that it allowed, like, that time, and especially the last year here, has allowed me to just, because I'm so removed from everything that has been, and removed from religious community, if you will, it allowed me to take a step back in a way that I hadn't been able to before, like completely restart and say, what's really, really critical, and how can that affect who I am? And I still am going to say, I love Jesus. I love the man who was Jesus. And I still feel very like that God is with me and encourages me and speaks to me in a sense, especially through the paintings so I'm not opposed to Christianity. It's just more how we've defined the culture of Christianity. So,
excellent.
That's the uncertainty.
Yeah,
part.
I've been a Jesus Bible guy for like my whole life, and like I was talking to somebody a week or two ago, and they said, I don't hardly ever think about God, and I was like, I've got multiple degrees in God, like. Theology, thoughts about God. Like I've got bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and doctorate degrees. I've thought about God every day of my entire life. Like
Right.
I don't do life without it. And then,
Right.
so then to go through this time when I felt like an atheist, like, what am I? You know, I was like, this is crazy. You know, I didn't even, you know, but yeah, I get it. And so many things, you know, come back over, you know, for me in a healing process, you know, very much a big process, but yeah. So, I want to jump. So this one piece called Lamenting. And when I first looked at it, I think I saw it first on Instagram, and it's just a cool piece. But when I read this part in the book, I didn't realize how big it was. This piece, you say it's it's the same size as you.
If I extend my arms out.
Yeah.
Yes, that was really intentional. I thought there's a lot going on in here and a lot needs to come out. And so this first canvas needs to be really, really big. And I started painting it and it just was so dark. I was like, oh gosh, I really don't want it to be this dark. And I just kept putting on more and more layers of dark and more dark.
I see it. Grays, really super dark blues, dark browns, some black hues in there, you know?
Yeah.
And then the scratches.
Yeah.
Like, what did you use to it just looks like you just scratched all over it.
I have a palette knives that are for painting. And I don't know, it was sort of an act of feeling angry and aggressive or something, like needing to really throw all the anger also onto the canvas, not just these blue and black tears that were saturating the canvas, but I also was like so mad. I can't even explain the mad. I just knew that was part of it. Like, I don't know, mad that I thought it was going to be easier, or I don't know, that I could have somehow processed this with different means, or that COVID wouldn't have happened. I don't know. I was just mad.
Yeah. Well, I like that one. And then this breakthrough piece that leads into the song that you wrote.
Yeah.
And I love the breakthrough piece too. And I thought it was interesting. The horizon, you said, was the other way around, and then you flipped it back around, and it's the same very dark colors as the big piece, but I don't know how big this one is, but same dark colors, but there is this glimmer of light, or you know, some kind of light's trying to poke through up there, and made me think of Psalm 23. So I just read from Psalm 22, and then you go right into Psalm 23, you know, the Lord is my shepherd. But that one thing, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you know, and I always like that imagery, because to have a shadow, you got to have some light somewhere. And I can go pretty dark even on my favorite movies and all that, but I want a little hope, a little glimmer of light somewhere, you know, like, just give me a little hope, God.
I know. I think going through transitions previously, or some rough times, I knew that it was possible. And I'm grateful that I had that experience previously. Like, I know if I work through something really hard, that there is hope on the other side. Right now, I feel completely hopeless, but I know that it's possible to feel hope and joy again. But it's going to take a lot of work to get there.
Yeah. So you're a songwriter too, huh?
Well, you know,
I mean, I knew you did worship, and I don't know what all you've done musically, but I really didn't know that part of you that well. And, but then I saw that you'd written a song called "I See You in the Messy."
Yes.
Who are you talking about? Who do you see in the messy?
Well, that's a good question, because I had written it to mean that I see God in the messy. He's like still there and that I find him even though things aren't defined. I can't control what's going on or have nice parameters around it. And I still find him in that sort of chaotic place. And a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about doing this podcast, I went through the song again and I was singing it. And I realized that although I intended it to mean that I see God in the messy, that it also means that he sees me in the messy and he sees me in what's undefined. And there's not, I couldn't believe I hadn't realized that before, but it was a wonderful thing to find in the song. And that's part of why I will write sort of lyrics, or I just put them to music. I'm not very good at playing guitar, but I just do that because the melody helps me remember the words and they'll come back to me. And so having this come back to me in a new way was really exciting. And
that's cool.
I loved that.
There's a Psalm 137 that's a song of lament when Israel's in exile. In Babylon, they've been carried off into exile, that's very much where I've felt emotionally, is in exile, and I still feel like I'm there. And but so there's a Psalm 137 that's became the imagery has become famous about we sitting and weeping beside the waters of Babylon. The rivers of Babylon, first verse of Psalm 137.
Yeah.
And it goes into, it says, we hung our harps. Like the Babylonians want us to sing our happy songs of Zion, our happy songs of home and Jerusalem and all that. And like, no, there's no way we can't do that. We're going to hang up our guitars. Like we can't sing songs sitting here in exile in the waters of Babylon in a foreign country. And God doesn't even feel like he's anywhere near us, This is the thought of Psalm 137. So it kind of reminded me. So it's kind of like that breaking of the light, the new, and then you had a piece called New Dawn, and this song kind of, it shifts definitely. At some point, the hope started oozing through, I guess, or whatever.
and little glimmers.
I thought about your canvas and how those colors soaked in and like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Usually, you paint a canvas with a primer ahead of time so that it doesn't absorb all your paint. And otherwise you just use way too much. And I didn't do that. And so really literally all the color just like soaked in and sort of bled through the back even. And I was using tons of paint, but it was such a great metaphor for me that even seeing that happen was healing. And then writing the lyrics and the melody sort of helped push me forward a little bit, because in writing that, just like in the Psalms, there is that lament part, but also I knew I could write a bit about truth and hope eventually coming along and having healing be on the horizon. And writing that, I think, carried me into the next phases of sort of pursuing the wholeness through painting. So
that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, when you kind of get through like the overlapping emotions and then the passing storm and kind of this expanding, all of a sudden these new colors are popping in, the reds and the oranges and the yellows. And so it's kind of a little bit of like a burnt orange and a burnt yellow and a burnt, but, but they're there, they're coming out.
Yeah. They were still mixed with a bit of blue. So that gives them the still not quite bright.
Yeah. Winter solstice. I've always had problems saying that. Solstice.
Yeah.
Isn't that seasonal? What's it get? How dark does it get? What's your shortest days in Germany? Like this past winter, what's your shortest day?
We got to, like, the sunrise would happen at 8:30 in the morning, and then the sun would set at 4:30.
Yeah. So that's even shorter than Kansas City. Yeah. You guys are up a little further north.
Will last for a long time too.
Yeah. Whew.
Yeah. It was rough, but
not much light on those days. More dark than light, right?
Yeah.
But there's light. And
there is light.
And you're on the back, you're on the side where it's getting a little more, you're gaining a little more and a little more and a little more. Huh.
I know, which was good. I thought, man, I can't keep painting blue forever, but and those colors aren't really colors I usually use. The orange and yellow and blue combination is just not typical for me. I fall more into the green category, like life and growth and, I don't know, beautiful emotions. So it was interesting to sort of dissect why I was using those colors, these sort of bold statements of what was going on emotionally.
The remember piece is really cool. And you even wrote the word into the piece, remember.
Yeah.
Such a biblical thing to do, right?
Yes.
I mean, like when even the Psalms of Lament are sprinkled with, like, like if they're sitting in exile, they're remembering back when God was evident in their life, I like that you're mentioning the Psalms of Lament, because that has been an example for me for a long time of how you can have negative emotion and hopeful endings in the same grouping, and how important it is to do that. So I really appreciate that. And the remembering is part of me. Yeah. In a psalm-like way, just thinking back to what God has done previously, and believing that he'll do the work of healing in me like he has done over the past years at different seasons. And it was really important for me to think back about that. So that's cool. Kind of why that's why it ends there, because I always come back to remembering, I guess. That's a good one. Yeah. And I wasn't, you know how when you do anything artistic, like even if I would do a sermon, like a homily,
Yeah.
I was always amazed at what people took from it.
Yeah.
So I wasn't necessarily trying to impose, the Psalms on your Creative Lament series. On the other hand, as I watched your paintings unfold and I saw that you titled them Lament, that's where I was certainly at, was in these Psalms of Lament. I've been meditating on these a lot. And so it was easy for me to start seeing some of that in there, and the processes and different things like that. But yeah. Well, you end with a quote from, I think it's probably the Lindsay man I know.
It is the Lindsay man you know.
And it's, I lament to experience authentic gratitude and joy.
Yeah, that is what I wanted to get to. It was gone, completely inaccessible. And once you know what it's like to have joy, it's hard to live without it for any long period of time. It just kind of goes to a really dark place. And, sometimes you have to be in that dark place for a while. And I knew that I would be, and that I had been, but I also wanted joy eventually.
Yeah.
And an ability to see beauty again in the way that I have. Like, I paint to express what I find is beautiful usually. In this time, I had to paint to find beauty again instead of expressing what I already had found. So it's kind of a backwards approach.
The contrast, the contrast does accentuate those experiences, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the negative emotions, the grief, the losses, all of that, and then sitting with those things and spilling them out, and then to have some gratitude and joy come through is such a contrast. And I literally had to force myself in my darkest days to just literally journal out things I'm grateful for, even though I didn't feel grateful. Yeah. It's like I hadn't got to that feeling of gratitude so much as just like, I better do this or it's just going to get way too dark, Yeah,
and I was doing that also, and it wasn't enough.
Yeah, I mean, they say, psychologists and neuroscience of the brain people, that that negativity sticks to us like Velcro. Negative emotions and negative experiences and negative feedback and comments and all that stuff. Just, that ancient part of our brain, the brainstem, the amygdala, are the sort of the fight, flight, fear components. And those are mostly of what we think about as the negative emotions, fears and angers and all that, and rejection and abandonment. And then gratitude, joy, those things, you actually have to meditate on them for a certain amount of time. Like if they're checking your brain out with those parts of your brains light up, so positive things can slide off like Teflon. I've heard one person using an old metaphor, but negative things can stick like Velcro. So there is something about, you got to be honest with your negative emotions, listen to them, I think, learn from them.
Yeah.
But then there is this component to the joy and the gratitude. You can't not pursue those things, right? In the midst of it.
Yeah. I knew I had to get a certain amount out before there was even space to have joy come back in. Like I had lost my ability to enjoy things. And when that happens, I know it's like an emergency situation, So what do you love to do when you're just having fun? What brings you, what refreshes you and replenishes you? I love to read and walk, and since I was young, I loved to get on my bike and just explore my hometown, and I've continued to enjoy that sort of slow exploration of something new. Of course, I love to paint and play a little bit of music, and talk one-on-one with people. This is one of my favorite things to do, actually.
Cool. So give us just real quickly, not just what are you reading right now? What are you listening to musically right now? Just curious. I'm usually reading a couple of books. Right now I'm reading the complete works of Van Gogh. So in the winter months, I like to read a book about an artist because that helps me not feel crazy. Okay. Because typically their lives are all a mess and somehow they create beautiful things. So I always find that really encouraging. And he's got a very spiritual background, and I love that part of his story, which not many people know about. So anyway, I'm reading about Van Gogh, and I'm also reading a book that my daughter's reading for school because I like to stay connected with what she's learning. And I have a terrible time remembering names of books, but so that's all right.
Those are the two things that I'm actively reading, but I have a lot of books on my nightstand, one of which is a child's book about dragons in German. So I can like learn some German and be entertained.
There you go.
At the same time.
Children's books, a great way to learn languages. Right. All right. Then what are you listening to musically?
Oh, Native Son is the book. Anyway, the other book I'm reading. This is really funny, but I sometimes don't listen to much music because it's too much noise when I'm really like trying to understand what's going on in my mind. And so what I most often like to listen to is bird sounds or just like jazz without vocals, just some blues or jazz of any sort.
Nice.
It can be in the background, but I haven't listened to much with words lately.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love jazz. I've done a lot of local jazz in Kansas City because there's quite a history with jazz in Kansas City. And some of the local artists I've followed, and then I have not read Van Gogh, so
it's a good read.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Let's let you tell people how they can connect with you, how they can see the book that you've put out and see some of your artwork. Yeah. Let them know.
Yeah. Well, I keep really up to date Instagram. So Harmony Eccles on Instagram. And I have a website also, which is harmonyeccles.com. This is so easy, right? And there is a tab on there for the book if you're interested in seeing more of it and seeing the pictures of the paintings and stuff. But yeah, those are the places I exist.
Awesome.
Out there.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on Spirituality Adventures. Tell Jeremy I said hello, and
I will.
Anybody else that, if you bump into a Buellman here or there, let them know I said hello.
Yeah,
and
I will.
I appreciate it, and I just want to thank you for coming on and doing this interview. It's been good. I think people will love your artwork, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for tuning in. Remember to visit our support page at www.spiritualityadventures.com. If you like what you heard, be sure to share it and leave a comment. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Harmony Media Production.